The afternoon, I went to see Kemper in the Santa Cruz County Jail, where he was being kept pending sentencing the next morning. I expected to talk to him for an hour or so in the presence of a jailer. Instead, I spent over 5 hours alone with him, locked up in a tiny glass-walled room, within sight, but not sound, of the jailer's desk. Though he wore manacles on his ankles, his hands were free. Disarming as he is at times, more than once during the long afternoon, I was reminded that I was sitting face to face with a 6-foot, 9-inch, 2.5-pound giant who had murdered and mutilated 6 co-eds, beaten his sleeping mother to death with a hammer, and strangled his mother's best friend in a matter of seconds. The frequent traffic of jailers and inmates past the glass wall was reassuring comfort. My visit with Kemper was an unforgettable experience, inducing a collage of feelings. As he talked on and on, he was many things. A lonely young man, grateful for companionship on the eve of what was certainly to be his last day outside prison. An angry and bitter sibling, recalling what he felt was rejection and a lack of love from a divorced father. A son who alternately hated and loved a mother he described as a man-hater. A sometimes wry and boastful raconteur, chronicling the events of his life. An anguished and remorseful killer when speaking of the co-eds whose bodies he had sexually assaulted after death, and of the pain he had caused their families.
The day those fathers testified in court was very hard for me. I felt terrible. I wanted to talk to them about their daughters, comfort them, but what could I say?
And a person quick to see the humorous side of things and laugh, even if the joke is on him. As a sex-starved young man, in what should have been a peak of his virility, he was sexually and socially so uncertain of himself that he began to prey on hitchhiking co-eds, not as a rapist, but as murderer and necrophiliac.
At first, I picked up girls just to talk to them, just to try to get acquainted with people my own age and try to strike up a friendship.
Then he began to have sex fantasies about the girls he picked up hitchhiking, but feared being caught and convicted as a rapist, so, he said.
I decided to mix the two and have a situation of murder, and no witnesses and no prosecution.
Kemper's first 2 victims were 18-year-old Fresno State College co-eds, Marianne Pesce and Anita Lucchesa, whom he stabbed to death May 7th after he picked them up in Berkeley.
I had full intentions of killing them. I would love to have them, but not having any experience at all.
He disclosed that despite the fact he killed Miss Pesce, she had awakened a feeling of tenderness in him that none of his other victims did.
She awakened a feeling of tenderness in me that no one ever did. I was really quite struck by her personality and her looks, and there was just almost a reverence there.
Kemper decapitated the girls' corpses, burying Miss Pesce's body in a redwood grove along a mountain highway. Miss Lucchesa's body he threw out on a hillside.
Stayed home from work and went up to the Santa Cruz area. Buried one of the girls as part of her body without the head. That was the Passion Girl. Then I continued on up to Loma Prieta area, where I dragged the other body, the chest of the girl, to a very heavily wooded area. And deposited the body there and backtracked slightly and deposited some incriminating materials and bloody clothing and other personal items. I also deposited both of their heads.
He kept their heads for a time and then hurled them down a steep slope of a ravine. Miss Pesce's head was found by hikers a few months later and identified through dental charts. Kemper later led investigators to the grave where he had buried her.
Sometimes, afterward, I visited there to be near her because I loved her and wanted her.
Miss Lucesa's head and body were never found. A month after Miss Pesey's head was discovered, Kemper abducted another victim, the beautiful Aiko Ku, 15, a talented Asian girl who wanted to be a professional dancer. She was hitchhiking from her home in Berkeley to a dance class in San Francisco, but she never made it there.
I told her she wasn't going to make it that night, indicating that I wasn't going to do anything severely wrong with her, that I'm sure she wouldn't be hurt. All the time I intended on killing her.
I drove her to an isolated location in the mountains above the city of Santa Cruz. I then taped her mouth and her arms.
After he taped her mouth shut, he pinched her nostrils together until she suffocated.
Then pinched her nose shut until she was not alive anymore.
Then he ripped her body and put it in the trunk of his car.
Placed her in the trunk and drove to a country bar to have a beer. Before I went into the bar, he checked the trunk again to make sure she was dead. I suppose as I was standing there looking, I was doing one of those triumphant things too, admiring my work and admiring her beauty, and I might say admiring my catch like a fisherman. I remember it was very exciting. There was actually a sexual thrill.
But why remove the heads?
It was kind of an exalted, triumphant type thing, like taking the head of a deer or an elk or something would be to a hunter. I was the hunter and they were the victims.
When asked why he resorted to murder,
death never entered as a factor. Alive, they were distant, not sharing with me. I was trying to establish a relationship, and there was no relationship there. When they were being killed, there wasn't anything going on in my mind except that they were going to be mine. That was the only way they could be mine. They were like spirit wives. I still had their spirits. I still have them. When I was 8, I did the same to my cat because it had given its affection to my sisters. I did not kill again until after I bought a .22 caliber pistol in January of this year. I went bananas after I got that .22. On the same day that I bought it, I killed Cynthia Shaw. I told her to get in the trunk, and when she was in, that's when I shot her.
Her name was Cynthia Shaw, and I picked her up on Mission Street headed towards the big truck. It's going to take her to my mother's home. It supposedly wasn't there. I asked her that she should get in the trunk and she'd be all right. Her and the dad wants. His children, currently, next time I pulled out a doctor, I had been checking the life signs of my victims, and there was absolutely not.
I then carried her body into my mother's apartment and kept it in the bedroom closet overnight. The next day when she was at work, I dissected it in the bathtub. I buried the girl's head in the backyard with her face turned toward my bedroom window, and sometimes at night, I talked to her, saying, "Love things the way you do to a girlfriend or wife." It was less than a month later when I picked up the 2 girls on the campus of the university. I put them both in the car before driving off campus.
About halfway down the hill to the bottom, I slowed down almost to a stop, commented on the view of the city from there. They both commented on it. While we were looking at that view, both of us got in the store from sitting in front first. And I turned and flew 3 shots, because the first one missed her head, passing through her hand. The second one grazed her head and knocked her out. The third one from the forehead. Charted the bodies up. One with a coat and one with a blanket. Drove on down the hill with the car behind me at this time, apparently not noticing anything wrong. Drove right past 2 guards at the bottom of the hill outside the guard's office. They had took, after my mother's work, I took this little body from the house, cleaned her up, and I had sex with her body. and brought both beds and checked them over, and I found that one of the bullets, the bullet that had killed was still lodged under the skin on the right side of her head, near her temple, so I cut it out.
I later cut off the heads in the trunk of my car while it was parked in the street in front of my mother's apartment. Those killings came on an impulse born out of anger for my mother. My mother and I had had a real tiff. I was pissed. I told her I was going to a movie, and I jumped up and went straight to the campus because it was still early. I said, the first girl that's halfway decent that I pick up, I'm gonna blow her brains out.
Kemper couldn't give me a positive answer to why he did what he did. He partly blamed society, the courts, and his parents as well, saying,
I didn't have the supervision I should have had once I got out. I was supposed to see my parole officer every other week and a social worker the other week. I never did. I think if I had, I would have made it. 2 weeks after I was on the streets, I got scared because I hadn't seen anyone. Finally, I called the district parole office and asked if I was doing something wrong. Was I supposed to go to my parole officer, or would he come to see me? I asked. The man on the phone asked, what's the matter? You got a problem? I told him no. And the man replied, well, we're awfully busy with people who have. We'll get to you. The doctors originally planned to release me in stages, to get me accustomed to the world outside again. They planned to send me to a halfway house environment where I would still have counseling, have a chance to get acquainted with girls at social functions, and become aware of persons in my own age group. When I got out on the street, it was like being on a strange planet. People my age were not talking the same language. I had been living with people older than I was for so long that I was an old fogey. Instead, I was sent to a California Youth Authority institution by court order, only to be released abruptly 5 months later, paroled to the custody of a mother who was an alcoholic and constantly bitched and screamed at me. She loved me in her way, and despite all the violent screaming and yelling arguments we had, I loved her too. But she had to manage your life and interfere in your personal affairs. My mother was a big, ugly, awkward woman who was 6 feet tall, and she was always trying to get me to go out with girls who were just like her. Friends of hers from the campus. She was an administrative assistant at the university. I may not be so much to look at myself, but I have always gone after pretty girls.
All of his hitchhiking co-ed victims were pretty and were small and delicate in stature. Of his father, he said,
he didn't want me around because I upset his second wife. Before I went to Atascadero, my presence gave her migraine headaches. When I came out, she was going to have a heart attack if I came around. It was because of that I was shipped off to my grandparents to live in complete isolation on a California mountaintop with my senile grandfather and my grandmother, who thought she had more balls than any man, and was constantly emasculating me and my grandfather to prove it. I couldn't please her. It was like being in jail. I became a walking time bomb, and I finally blew. It was like that the second time with my mother.
Kemper laughed as he recalled an incident with his grandmother when she left him home alone one day, but took his grandfather's .45 automatic with her in her purse because she was afraid he might play around with it in her absence.
My grandparents were going to Fresno on a monthly shopping trip. I saw her big black pocketbook bulging as she went out the door, and I said to myself, why that old bitch, she's taken the gun with her because she doesn't trust me, even though I promised I wouldn't touch it. I looked in my grandfather's bureau drawer, and Sure enough, the gun was gone from its usual place. I toyed with the idea of calling the chief of police in Fresno and telling him there's a little old lady walking around town with a .45 in her purse and she's planning a holdup. How do you suppose she would have talked herself out of that? There were moments prior to her death when I felt like punishing my mother too. I did what I did to spare her the suffering and shame that she would have felt if she ever found out what I had done, but there were times when she was bitching and yelling at me that I felt like retaliating and walking over to the telephone in her presence and calling the police to say, "Hello, I'm the co-ed killer," just to lay it on her.
Kemper's testimony in court revealed his desire to punish his mother did not end with the fatal hammer blow.
After cutting off her head, I put it on a shelf and screamed at it for an hour, then threw darts at it and ultimately smashed her face in.
After his arrest, Edmund had tried to end his own life 4 times.
I did not have a suicidal feeling when I was first locked up. Then the kindness and respect with which I was treated by the jail personnel after a while started to get to me. I started feeling like I didn't deserve all that nice treatment. Not after what I had done, and I guess that's why I guess you heard me say that I wanted to kill Herbie Mullen. Well, there was a time when I thought it would be a good solution for everyone. It would be good for society and save everyone a bundle of money.
Mullen was convicted of 2 counts of first-degree murder and 8 counts of second-degree murder in the shooting deaths of 10 persons he killed during a 21-day rampage early in 1973 in Santa Cruz County. 5 of the victims were complete strangers to him. He said he 3 others in 1972.
Instead of spending thousands and thousands of dollars to lock the 2 of us up for life, to protect us from people and people from us, I figured that if I killed him and then they sent me to the gas chamber, it would be a good solution to the problem. I know I'd never get a chance to, though, and I don't have any intention of killing him or anyone else.
Kemper and Mullen were next-door neighbors in their security prisoner cell block at the San Mateo County Jail before Mullen was tried and convicted. Kemper made no secret of his disdain for Mullen from the first moment of their meeting in San Mateo. "You're a no-class killer," he taunted him.
It really sticks in my craw that Mullen only got 2 firsts and I got 8. He was just a cold-blooded killer running over a 3-week period, killing everybody he saw for no good reason. Ha ha. I guess that's kind of hilarious. Am I sitting here so self-righteously talking like that after what I've done?
I asked him what he planned to do with the rest of his years in prison.
I've always loved science and math, and I'd also like to study French and German. After that, I hope I can find a way to help other people. Maybe they can study me and find out what makes people like me do the things they do.
The next morning, Judge Harry F. Brower sentenced Kemper to life in prison and told him he was going to recommend, in the strongest terms possible, that Kemper not be released for the rest of his natural life. One relationship that obviously has touched Kemper is that with Bruce Colomey, Santa Cruz County Sheriff's deputy. Colomey has been with Kemper more than any other officer, transporting him to and from San Mateo County Jail to Santa Cruz for court appearances and remaining with him at all times when he was out of his cell. Kemper said of Colomey,
"He's more like a father to me than anyone I've ever known. He's like the father I wish I had had."
Only a few years older than himself, Deputy Colomey told me one of the last things Kemper did before he left the Santa Cruz courthouse for state prison was to remove his cherished Junior Chamber of Commerce membership pin from his coat lapel and give it to me. Ed looked at it for a long time and tears came to his eyes. Then he handed it to me and said, "Here, I want you to have it." For all of his seeming ability to relate to people in an animated and warm exchange, Kemper also has the ability to withdraw without warning into a kind of frightening reverie reliving his acts of violence. I watched it happen. He had paused in his outpouring of talk about himself and looked at me curiously.
You haven't asked the questions I expected a reporter to ask.
What do you mean? Give me some examples.
Oh, what is it like to have sex with a dead body? What does it feel like to sit on your living room couch and look over and see two decapitated girls' heads on the arm of the couch? The first time it makes you sick to your stomach.
He began to detail to me how he killed one of his victims. The illustration he chose made me even more uncomfortable. It was that of Mrs. Hallett, not a co-ed, but a mature woman like me. Kemper straightened up in his chair and began a graphic description.
I came up behind her and crooked my arm around her neck like this, and just lifted her off the floor.
He was bending his powerful arm in front of himself at chin level. He began to wobble his head around, never changing the position of his arms and gazing fixedly at me. His pale face had become slightly flushed, his eyes glazed, his breath coming a little quickly, and he stuttered almost imperceptibly as he spoke.
She just hung there, and for a moment, I didn't realize she was dead. I had broken her neck, and her head was just wobbling around with the bones of her neck disconnected in the skin sac of her neck.
Holy Christ, I said to myself. What am I doing here? I reached for a cigarette in my pocket and tried not to show I was upset. What do you think now when you see a pretty girl walking down the street?
One side of me says, wow, what an attractive chick. I'd like to talk to her, date her. The other side of me says, I wonder how her head would look on a stick.
When I insisted that we should stop talking and that Kemper should eat, the jailer invited me to stay for dinner. Big Ed urged me to accept, and I did. He carried the trays into the little room himself and arranged them on the desk chairs. We chatted as we ate, and he was the host. He ate hungrily, and I noticed he had finished his rice with meat sauce. I had more than I could eat, so I offered to share. What seemed like a large portion to me must have been but a morsel to a large man like him. He gratefully accepted the added food, but cautioned me as I scraped it from my tray onto his.
Save some for yourself.
I gave him my milk as well, saying, I really hate milk. You can have it.
Do you? I love it.
When dinner was over, I said I must go, and when he got up and proceeded toward the door, I said, Do you think you could knock on the window and get the jailer to spring me, Ed? He laughed and replied, I'll try. He stood in the doorway, his hair brushing the top of the door jamb, watching me leave, as if he were graciously bidding a guest goodbye from his home. He said to a deputy, Could I have some matches? I had been lighting his cigarettes all afternoon with my lighter. The sergeant on duty at the desk said to the deputy, He can't have any matches, but light his cigarette for him. Kemper looked at me and grinned like a teenager.
Yesterday I had matches, but isn't it funny when you're convicted, you immediately become combustible?
Well, Ed, if you'd learned to stay out of trouble, you wouldn't find yourself in these predicaments.
Right on.
As I left, he gave me a final salute of his hand and a smile.